Okay, so this question talks about cumulative frequency graphs, and it's giving you a cumulative frequency table for 200 workers, and it's asking you to plot the cumulative frequency curve, the graph, on the graph opposite. So we need to remember that cumulative frequency graphs always have this standard shape, so always increasing, because cumulative means it gets bigger and bigger. So we'll have this kind of classic elongated S shape somewhere on the line, where the cumulative frequency is plotted up there, and along here is the end of the intervals. Now it's really important you remember that you plot the end of the intervals, so we're going to be plotting these numbers against these numbers. So we're plotting the end of the interval against the cumulative frequencies given. So if we get the graph paper, again it's really important we look at the scale of the graph. So for this graph, then we're looking at going across, it's 2 for each little square, and going up here it's also 2 for each little square. So the first plot we had to do was 20 against 25, so 20 up to 25. Then we had to do 30 against 70, so 30 against 70. And then we had to do 40 against 138, so 40 against 138, and then it's 50 against 175, and then it's 60 against 186, so 60 against 186, 70 against 194, and 80 against 200. So we need to draw our best fit curve that we can through these points. Quite a classic way of doing this is to ghost the graph first. So in other words, you kind of run your pen or pencil through the points without actually putting your pen on the paper. So you're getting your brain to coordinate your hand with the crosses. So if we ghost them first, do that several times, then before we put our pen down, we're kind of getting our brain used to the pattern that we're trying to do. So let's give it a go. Okay, so not too bad. Slightly off on there, but it'll be within the examiner's tolerance, and again slightly off on there, but within the examiner's tolerance. You just got to be careful that you're really close to the crosses as best as you can. Okay, so that's the graph drawn. Zoom on this camera. Well, let me see the whole graph here, I'm afraid, guys. But we can see that what we've done is we've plotted the end of the intervals against the cumulative frequencies, and we've ended up with this nice elongated S shape, as we'd expect. So that'll give us the 2 marks for the plotting. The question then goes on and says, Graham says 10% of the workers in the factory are older than 65. Is Graham correct? Well, 10% of 200, because they told us this was about 200 workers, is 20 workers. So basically we're trying to see, are 20 workers older than 65? Well, if we go to the graph, then we can see that we've got 25, 65, so 65 is there. So basically we would draw a line up to our graph, so 65 up to our graph. That would come to, on my graph, 190, but remember each person will have a slightly different possibility. But as long as you're within 2, then it shouldn't be too bad. So we drew up to the graph from 65, and it's telling us that 10 workers were over 65. So 10 workers over 65, 190 workers were below. So we found out that 10 workers are over 65, but the question Graham said was 10% of the workers are older. He wanted 20 workers. So basically we have to conclude that Graham is wrong. Only 10 workers are over 65, which is 5%, not 10%. Okay. Now, if you'd have just had 10 workers over 65 and compared to the 20, that would still give you both marks. I've just realised that 10 out of 200 is the same as 5 out of 100, which is 5%. So sometimes quoting percentages against each other or numbers against each other just exemplifies the answer. So the key thing to remember then is cumulative frequency graphs. We always plot the end of the intervals against the cumulative frequencies, and the graph should always look as if it's growing, growing, growing. Classic S shape. And when we've drawn the graph, we can then interpret it by reading off values, and again we saw that we had this classic S shape created. Okay, so that's cumulative frequency graphs and a bit of interpretation.